Question orale des chefs de l'opposition officielle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A traveler sitting today in the Toronto airport might pick up a copy of the National Post and read the story below, a headline that reads, "Spend Happy New Brunswick gets set to make the same old mistakes all over again." And when that traveler finishes reading that article, they might look up and see a sign that says, "New Brunswick is a growth leader in Canada, a soaring economy, 3,000 jobs." Hopefully they aren't eating a donut or something, because they might choke on the very conflicting messages. The truth is that this government is creating the conditions for financial catastrophe when interest rates rise again. The Gallant government has already created the conditions for New Brunswick's population to shrink, for businesses to close, for 5,000 people to leave the workforce, and for 3,500 jobs to disappear last month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly hope that this person in Toronto is not going to tune in to question period and to listen to the doom and gloom coming from the opposition about the state of New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, do we have challenges in our province? Absolutely. Do we have opportunities? Yes, we do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the economy grew in 2015 at a record pace, the best economic growth rate we've seen in New Brunswick since 2004. In 2016 and 2017, the economy of our province was estimated to grow in each of those years, Mr. Speaker, not at the same rate, but it's compounded on the back of a great year in 2015. New Brunswickers, businesses, and the people of our province are working so hard, Mr. Speaker, to get these things going in the right direction. Why will the opposition not focus on all the positives that are happening in our province, like our economic growth rate over the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker?
Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Premier has indicated that he has made a deal with the 6 chiefs representing 6 First Nations. However, as we know, there are 15 First Nations in our province. Has the Premier also reached an agreement with the remaining 9 First Nations communities? Does the Sisson Mine project require their agreement also before it can proceed? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, as the Leader of the Opposition would know, he was the Minister of Finance when consultations started with the 15 First Nation communities in 2011, Mr. Speaker, with regards to the Sisson Mine. It was identified that we would have to continue negotiations and make sure that we accommodate to the best of our ability the Maliseet communities of this province. And, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you one thing, there is no way that there would have been a deal with the Maliseet communities had the Leader of the Opposition still been the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you that we're very proud of the fact that there's a deal with regards to the Sisson Mine with the First Nation communities. This is a project that during the 18 months of construction would bring $579 million in our province. Approximately 500 jobs would be created during construction, with an additional 300 jobs over the 27-year lifetime of the project. Why will the Leader of the Opposition not focus on that good news instead of trying to still project doom and gloom about the state of the province, Mr. Speaker?
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Which First Nations communities must agree for the Energy East pipeline to proceed? The same 6? What about the Minco mine outside of Woodstock? What about our potential natural gas industry? Is the Premier trying to employ the same divide and mentality that he participated in with Justin Trudeau on the Health Accord? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we have demonstrated our willingness and our efforts to have a good relationship with First Nation communities for this very reason, because we want to be able to advance important projects that will help create jobs and economic growth in our province. And we're very proud that we were able to sign these agreements with the Maliseet communities, allowing this one of the last hurdles of the Sisson Mine project moving forward to be jumped over, Mr. Speaker. And we're also very proud of the work that we're doing, and they want to mention the federal government, with them, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of the fact that we've been supportive of the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, and it was a great hurdle that we jumped over yesterday, Mr. Speaker, having this be ratified by the European Commission. Mr. Speaker, there are good things that are happening around New Brunswick and in our province, Mr. Speaker, that are going to help create jobs for New Brunswickers, that are going to help create economic growth. The Sisson Mine and CETA being ratified yesterday are good news items for the people in New Brunswick and our economy.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget indicates First Nations tax agreements amounts will increase by $7 million in 2017. Can the Premier advise the House if that figure was calculated using the old agreement or the new agreement? And if it was made using the old agreement, will there be a revised figure provided to the House in the near future? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to get up and talk about the First Nations tax sharing agreements that the previous government wanted to cancel. And we support very much because we want to be strong partners with our First Nations communities to help them do economic and social development in their communities and work collaboratively for the good of all New Brunswick. It gives us great opportunities, Mr. Speaker, to work collaboratively for the good of everyone. And Mr. Speaker, the value of these agreements goes beyond even what you see on the surface. It helps First Nations communities with schools, with health care, with social services. And Mr. Speaker, we're very, very proud to be partners with our First Nations communities. When it comes to the interests of maintaining the important relationships, we will continue to work collaboratively, and we will protect the revenue for New Brunswick taxpayers.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the new agreement that the Premier announced regarding First Nations gasoline and tobacco tax makes no mention of the so-called grey gambling machines. Can the Premier advise the Assembly if his government has made any progress with this issue, or have there ever been any efforts made in that regard? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the opportunity again to talk about the collaborative relationships that we value with our First Nations communities. We are working together, unlike what we saw in the past, and we're working with our federal partners as well. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to protecting revenues, when it comes to responsible gaming, we will continue to work collaboratively. We've been in continuous discussions with our First Nations communities. We'll continue this. And Mr. Speaker, it's in everyone's interest to protect our revenue sources, to have responsible gaming, and we will continue working towards the best solutions for everyone.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, in the third quarter fiscal update, the government goes into detail about a $1 million expenditure for the consulting work in relation to the strategic review program. MC Business Solutions is mentioned as having received $882,000. However, in public accounts supplementary supplier list, McGuinness Cooper Business Solutions is listed as having received $480,000. Can the Premier explain the discrepancy between the public accounts figure of $480 and the third quarter fiscal update figure of $882? Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, nous l'avons dit hier, nous n'allons pas discuter sur le paquet de la Chambre en ce moment des questions spécifiques sur les ressources humaines. Mais qu'est-ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que la révision stratégique des programmes que nous avons entamé comme gouvernement nous a énormément aidé à avancer les priorités des gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Ça nous a aidé à conclure exactement comment on pouvait équilibrer le budget pour 2020, comme on l'a toujours proposé de le faire, tout en investissant davantage dans l'éducation, dans la santé et dans des choses qui vont nous aider à créer une économie prospère. Alors, Monsieur le Président, je suis très fier du travail que le gouvernement et que les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick a donné en termes d'efforts à le processus de la révision stratégique des programmes. Je suis très fier que ça nous a aidé à faire des investissements records en éducation, des investissements importants en santé, tout en équilibrant le budget pour 2020 et en faisant croître l'économie de notre belle province, Monsieur le Président.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as we know, the Premier's political appointee, Lynn Hoyt, had a G&B email address that redirected people to his McGuinness Cooper email address. Mr. Hoyt was also listed as a lead on the strategic review org chart, replacing Michael Horgan. Mr. Hoyt is also listed as the lead on the Deliverology org chart. Can the Premier advise the House how much of this $882,000 spent on the consulting and Build Against Strategic Review program is in fact compensation for Mr. Hoyt? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister responsible for strategic program review, I want to remind the opposition and those listening of how successful an initiative that was, Mr. Speaker. Because of strategic program review, we are actually going to be able to keep our commitment to balance the books, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the Leader of the Opposition when he was on this side of the House, strategic program review has allowed us to identify $293 million in savings within government, $296 million in new revenue, Mr. Speaker, to take that balanced approach and identifying $600 million, or just about, to help us achieve a balanced budget in the province of New Brunswick by 2020-2021, which is what we committed to in our platform, Mr. Speaker. It was exhaustive consultations, a lot of work within the civil service, but we're getting the job done, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Riverview.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance talks about protecting the revenue stream, yet sits idly by as the independent gas retailers go out of business because of an unlevel playing field. But in the budget documents, the multi-year plans, we see revenue has declined by over $500 million in the next 4 years, from $9.189 billion this fiscal year to $9.729 billion in 2021. So will the Minister give us a breakdown of where this additional revenue is coming from? I mean, $500 million is a hefty increase, Mr. Speaker, and the Minister is a self-confessed budget nerd, so the Minister must have a very fairly accurate analysis of how this increase will occur. Please give us the sources and amounts of where this increase in revenue will come from.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it might be a nice segue to pick up from where my colleague just picked up on how successfully we were able to find revenues and efficiencies both with our strategic program review, where last year we laid out a budget which was a base, a foundation upon which to build for this budget, where we can very successfully meet our targets, meet our fiscal plan that was laid out for multi-year, and in fact even exceed our targets. We've cut the deficit in half, and Mr. Speaker, we announced increases in revenue with a small HST increase last year, and this year we are seeing still increases in household spending, we're seeing increases in wages, we're seeing increases in consumption, and Mr. Speaker, we see economic growth, and our revenues we're always looking for opportunities, but Mr. Speaker, we value business.
Member for Riverview.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot of people would debate the small increase in HST, $300 million out of the pockets of taxpayers. That's a lot of money. In fact, some people would say that increasing the HST was the lazy way out. Oh, that was the finance minister. Anyways, on page 172 of the main estimates, overall tax revenue is expected to increase by $200 million over the next 4 years, each year. Bearing in mind we have a shrinking population, already the highest tax jurisdiction in North America. So can the Minister advise us how her government intends to make an increase of an additional $200 million per year of tax revenue over the next 4 years? Is this tax increase going to come from a carbon tax? Is it going to come from a sugar tax? Maybe it's going to come from Joe Trudeau. Tell us.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure again to stand up and proudly speak to our team and our team's work on this excellent budget, in fact, incredible budget that we just put forward. And Mr. Speaker, it might be a good time to remind the opposition as well that while we have $300 million projected from HST, $100 million of this went back into the hands of low and middle income New Brunswickers. And New Brunswickers are getting checks quarterly through HST credits based on income. And Mr. Speaker, we take care of New Brunswick families, and we continue to always think of this as we make decisions. We always want to take a balanced approach. And I want also to address the repetitive HST. Next.
Member for Riverview.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister may be proud of the job that her team has done, but John Robinson of the National Post says New Brunswick gets ready to make the same old mistakes all over again. Mr. Speaker, they haven't learned anything in their time in office. They still are tax and spend Liberal government. But the minister has made projections of revenue and deficits through 2021, but does the minister have a revised net debt figure to share? Very quiet on this during the speeches, but the Liberal election platform indicated the net debt would grow by $1.695 billion through to 2021. But the minister should know the net debt has already grown by $2.4 billion, and there's almost 4 years before we get to 2021. So what is the new revised net debt growth through 2021?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I'd like to get up and address some of the things the Leader Opposite has touched upon. He wants to talk about taxes, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about when he was a minister, when the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister of Finance, tax increases that they thrusted on the people in New Brunswick. Personal income tax went up, corporate income tax went up, tobacco tax went up, liquor tax went up, gas tax went up, user fees went up, Mr. Speaker, all of which asked New Brunswickers to pay hundreds of millions of dollars more. Mr. Speaker, what is interesting is that now that we are having a balanced approach to get our books to balance by 2020, all the while investing in things that will help us continue to grow the economy, invest record amounts in education, and invest in things that will help healthcare, and we're advancing things to move on those things, they're opposing them. So, Mr. Speaker, they raised all those taxes, but yet they won't let us, they won't support a $100 million tax HST rebate to the people of New Brunswick, taxing the 1% richest, Mr. Speaker, the CPP enhancement, minimum wage, and free tuition for those that need it, Mr. Speaker.
Time, Premier. Member for Gagetown, Petitcodiac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are for the Minister of Energy and Resource Development. In Volume 2 of the Auditor General's 2015 report, item 4.124 says, we recommend the Department establish goals and objectives for the private land silviculture program to measure the benefits of the program to the province. Private silviculture RDC funding was cut in 2016-2017. The program went from $1 million in 2014 to zero. Has the minister put the recommendations in place, or was the answer to axe the funding to the program?
The Honourable Minister of Energy and Resource Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. And Mr. Speaker, he's been bringing forward some good questions. And the fact of the matter is, remind everybody in the House, remind everybody in New Brunswick, this is how we pay for things, Mr. Speaker. The forestry sector, the agriculture sector, and the fishery sector, the pillars of our economy. Very strong, Mr. Speaker. So it's really good to talk about this, Mr. Speaker. Job creation, economic growth are priorities of our government, and it's good to be talking about that. And that's a very important question that the member opposite brought forward about the silviculture budget. Mr. Speaker, the silviculture budget, we'll be working on that, and I'm sure that we'll have the opportunity to talk to that when we get to the estimate stage, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is, we have 22,000 people that are boots in the grounds in the woods, Mr. Speaker. They're part of the economic fabric, what makes up the province of New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. And it's great that we have a very vibrant forestry industry, very vibrant forestry sector. Very great that we have some very good operators in the province that stretch the fibre as far as they can go.
I'm member for Gagetown, Petitcodiac.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm certainly concerned about the 40,000+ private woodlot owners. I'm going to keep asking questions about the same volume. In Chapter 3, Item 3.118 recommends the Department continue silviculture monitoring. Funding decreased for planning and monitoring silviculture on Crown and private lands. In 2014, the funding was $559,000. This year, the budget was $130,000. This budget has been slashed. Could the minister please tell us what is the status of this recommendation?
The The Honourable Minister of Resource Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like I say, it's good to get some questions on the floor of the House of some of our vibrant industries, the industries that are helping pay for roads, for schools and hospitals, Mr. Speaker. Very important part of our fabric. Mr. Speaker, the marketing boards process wood sale transactions and deliver the Department of Energy and Resource Development private woodlot silviculture program. And Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work to try to find efficiencies and work with the woodlot owners as how we can do things better, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue down that road, and I'm sure that we're going to have a great conversation when we get to the estimate stage, Mr. Speaker. And I know the member opposite would like to keep on bringing up the volume that's been put forward by the Auditor General, but Mr. Speaker, we're all working on that, Mr. Speaker. But fact is, some of the good things that are happening, I got mentioned a few moments ago that the forestry sector is one of the industries that's paying and helping pay the way in the province. But we've got some good things that are happening, Mr. Speaker. We have challenges in front of us, but we also have some great opportunities. Look at the CETA program that's in front of us, that was just ratified yesterday, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister, member for Gagetown, Petitcodiac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Item 3.132 recommends verifying information that is self-reported by licensees for accuracy. Can the minister give me the status of this recommendation? Would this not also fall under the decreased planning and monitoring budget?
Honourable Minister of Energy and Resource Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's, like I say, it's always good to get questions with respect to some of our prime industries in the province, Mr. Speaker. But I started to talk about CETA, what it means for this province, the opportunities. And I mentioned about we have some tremendous challenges in front of us, but even better, Mr. Speaker, the opportunities. Like I just mentioned a few moments ago about CETA. So many of the tariffs that will be dropped, so many opportunities for us. The fish and the seafood sector, Mr. Speaker. Some of the tariffs are going to be flatlined. So what an opportunity as we stretch across the arc. We call it the arc right across us, Mr. Speaker, right across the ocean, not very far from us. What are the opportunities in the forestry sector, Mr. Speaker, as they start to develop new products, new resources, and new technologies that they can stretch the fiber to further, Mr. Speaker? I'm very proud of the industries that we have in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, some of the significant investments that the forestry sector has brought forward. It is vibrant.
Leader of the third party. Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the Globe and Mail reported on the high rates of sexual assault cases classified as unfounded by police forces across this country, with the highest rates right here in New Brunswick, the Ontario Minister for Community Safety has been out on the front page of the Globe and Mail calling on her province's police forces to incorporate outside oversight of sexual assault case files. She's promoting the Philadelphia model, Mr. Speaker, a civilian oversight program that invites frontline advocacy groups to review sexual assault files alongside senior officers. And Mr. Speaker, this has worked in Philadelphia with unfounded rates plummeting from 18 to 4%. Will the Minister of Public Safety join Minister Lalonde and call for the implementation of the Philadelphia model in New Brunswick?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, j'apprécie beaucoup encore une fois les questions qui donc le chef du troisième parti nous demande comme gouvernement. Comme ministre responsable pour l'égalité des femmes, je veux répéter ce que j'ai dit il y a quelques jours, que cette situation est très sérieuse. Nous sommes, comme gouvernement, très préoccupés et nous allons nous assurer qu'il va y avoir une analyse de la situation. Nous voulons nous assurer aussi qu'il va y avoir des choses qui vont rectifier la situation. Comme j'ai constaté il y a quelques jours, nous allons travailler avec nos collègues, que ce soit au niveau fédéral, que ce soit à l'intérieur des provinces de l'Atlantique, pour voir exactement comment on devrait s'y prendre collectivement pour aborder cette situation très sérieuse. Et je peux vous dire que lorsque nous aurons de quoi donc on pourra donner comme mise à jour, ça, on le fera ici sur le parquet de la Chambre, Monsieur le Président.
Leader of the third party.
Mr. Speaker, what we need is action in New Brunswick. What we need, Mr. Speaker, is action to protect the safety of women in New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, the provincial rate of sexual assault cases deemed unfounded here in our province was 32% on average but for St. John, it was 50%. In an interview with Terry Sagan yesterday morning, Chief Paul Fiander, the president of the Association of the Chiefs of Police, indicated, in fact, each year the Department of Public Safety does audits of our police departments. And that's what I want to ask the Minister about. Can the Minister of Public Safety tell the House whether or not he was made aware of the results of his department's audits regarding the rate of unfounded sexual assault case reports, and if not, why wasn't he?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the questions. I think we have to make sure that we recognize that we're all in this together. We don't want to start pointing fingers here, and I certainly hope that's not what the leader of the third party is trying to do during question period. What is very clear is that this is a very serious situation in which we have to address. I said it just days ago that we have spoken to our colleagues in Atlantic Canada. We want to cooperate with them. We want to cooperate with the federal government as well. We want to make sure we cooperate with the appropriate authorities. Mr. Speaker, I have spoken to the Women's Council about this just days ago and days after the report came out, Mr. Speaker. So what I can tell the member opposite is we are on this and we are certainly going to take action. We want to make sure it's a coordinated effort, Mr. Speaker, with all those that need to play a role. Now, with that said, he talks about taking action, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud that today we will be taking action as we will be introducing legislation to protect gender-based violence, to protect from intimate and domestic violence, and we think that is something that is definitely action-packed to help the women of...
Leader of the third party.
Monsieur le Président, les services policiers de North Bay en Ontario ont indiqué qu'ils vont inclure des experts externes dans leur évaluation de cas d'agression sexuelle. Le Conseil des femmes du Nouveau-Brunswick a demandé à ce gouvernement d'inclure des organismes communautaires qui ont l'expérience en service direct en violence sexuelle dans n'importe quelle évaluation de cas d'agression sexuelle au Nouveau-Brunswick. Au ministre responsable, va-t-il diriger les agences policières d'inclure dans les processus d'évaluation ces experts externes?
The Honourable the Premier.
Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, je remercie le chef du troisième parti pour soulever ces questions, mais comme j'ai constaté il y a déjà quelques jours, nous allons nous assurer d'aborder la situation, mais encore une fois, on veut travailler avec tous nos partenaires, and I know that there are some representatives from our police forces that are here, Mr. Speaker, in the gallery. They're here because they care about this issue deeply. They're here because we're going to be introducing legislation to help try to put an end to intimate violence and protect those that are in those very terrible situations, Mr. Speaker. So we are all in this together, and I can tell you that within a very short time we'll have an update for the legislature. But we are in talks with, again, our counterparts, our colleagues, and different authorities and people that we want to have play a role in ensuring that we address this very situation in a timely fashion. So again, I thank the member opposite for his questions, and I guarantee that we will be back with an update on this very serious situation soon. Thank you.
Member for Oromocto-Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At election time, the Liberals said that early childhood development was a priority, but since that time, all we've seen are that major campaign promises have been left unfulfilled, and including the daycare operators cut by $2.3 million in funding. The Early Childhood Care and Education New Brunswick represents early child care workers and operators in New Brunswick. This week, a copy of the letter was sent to the operators of New Brunswick saying that the Early Childhood Care and Education New Brunswick will be closing. Can the Minister explain to this House why the government is closing the office of Early Childhood Care Education New Brunswick and laying off all of the early childhood and education staff?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood.
Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Early Childhood Development, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we're making record investments in early childhood. We've been working with our child care operators throughout the province, working on their curriculum, working with making sure we have accessibility for more New Brunswick parents and their children, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the record that we've had in the last 2 years as a department and actually working one-on-one. Just in fact, a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, we had many of the daycare operators from around the province come here with a 2-day consultative process to be able to look at ways how we can improve on our daycare assistance programs, how we can improve with regards to our curriculum, how we can work with the operators throughout the province, Mr. Speaker, both the nonprofit and the profit sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that we have some really great operators in the province here, Mr. Speaker, and it's by working together, Mr. Speaker, that we're going to have a better daycare program here in the province.
Member for Oromocto-Lincoln.
Again, Mr. Speaker, a key theme from the Premier and his ministers that the government says one thing at election time and does another afterwards, questioning the credibility of this government, as well not wanting to be accountable for major decisions that are affecting the people of this province. The Early Childhood Care and Education New Brunswick represents all early childhood workers and operators in New Brunswick. This week, a letter was sent to those operators saying that their offices will be closed, 7 employees will be laid off due to the provincial government cut in funding. This Early Childhood Care and Education New Brunswick spoke very loudly against the $2.3 million cut to the operators last year. Can the minister tell us and explain to this House why these offices are closing and how much of this closure is related to the association's advocacy?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais me lever en chambre aujourd'hui pour discuter un peu de l'importance de la petite enfance. Monsieur le Président, c'est primordial pour l'avenir de notre province, c'est primordial pour notre économie, c'est primordial pour notre tissu social. Mr. Speaker, we take education and early childhood development as one of the biggest priorities of the people of New Brunswick, and that's why we are investing record amounts in the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, Mr. Speaker. That's why in the last budget that was just introduced, we are increasing its budget by 4.9%. That's why we increased it last budget, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're the government that has invested the most in education and early childhood development in the history of our province, Mr. Speaker. Now, and we will continue to make these investments because it's going to help our economy. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we're proud of the fact that we've created 2,300 daycare spaces and that we're going to be doubling the daycare assistance by January 1st of 2018.
Time for question period has expired.